This House is now in session. Good morning to one and all. I wish to welcome back the honorary member for St. Michael Southeast. It is always a pleasure to see you here, and you have warmed my morning already. Prior to the suspension on Friday, the 1st of March 2019, this honorable chamber was in Standing Finance Committee debating the Appropriation Bill and the Estimates 2019. We continue with this debate this morning.
This House is now in Standing Finance Committee. I too want to add my welcome back to the Honourable Minister, the Member of Parliament for St. Michael South East. The House always feels different when you're here, for the better. And we are glad to have you back this morning. This morning we continue with Head 30, correct? Yeah. Head 30, the Attorney General's Office.
In the amount of $70,291,726.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, can I crave your indulgence and ask that you allow my senior officers to join me?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, ma'am. Morning, Madam Chairman of Standing Finance Committees, members of Parliament. The head of the Attorney General, Head 30, is responsible for a total of $152 million of expenditure. Of that amount, just over $70 million is non-statutory expenditure, and it is that particular figure which we are called upon to justify in terms of the program of the Office of the Attorney General. I believe it will be fair to say that most people will immediately associate the Office of the Attorney General with the notion of law and order, but there are a number of departments, Madam Chair, that contribute significantly to our ability to carry out our mandate. We have the Criminal Justice and Research Project Unit, a little known but very vital cog in the wheel of our ability to fight the scourge of crime and to make advances against criminal activity. We also have the Forensics Laboratory. We also have a project unit whose responsibility is that of taking care of the physical plant, the courts, the police stations, and things of that sort. My opening remark, though, would focus, Madam Chair, on the area of law and order. I think it is fair to say that the Barbados that we are familiar with today has strayed significantly from the Barbados of previous years. In the Barbados Labour Party Covenant of Hope, it is declared that the first call on national resources as far as that particular noble party is concerned will be that of law and order, safety and security. Barbados has been plagued over the last decade especially with instability and a rise in a particular phenomenon of gun-related crimes. Madam Chair, if I can share with you just a few numbers. Between the year 2010 and 2017, there were 2,908 victims of firearm-enabled crimes. 2,908. These figures are produced by the research of the Criminal Justice Research Project. And I know that while the face of the particular individuals perpetrating those crimes would be seen as distinctly male, I feel I should tell the Chamber that of that number, 645 were female, and that is not an insignificant number. But that is firearm-enabled crimes. Barbados has reached a point, Madam Chair, where gun violence, especially as it relates to homicide, has now taken on perhaps a specter that we are not entirely familiar with. If I can share further numbers with you. In the decade starting 1989 to 1998, 1989 to 1998, there were a total of 184 homicides in that 10-year period. And of that number, 42 alone involved firearms. 42. We've had some months in recent years when we would have had 42 over a period of just 2 or 3 months. In the ensuing decade, Madam Deputy Chair, 1999 to 2008, that number began to mushroom. So of a total of 267 homicides, 101 were caused by firearms. The immediate past decade, though, demonstrates that it has gotten entirely out of hand. And in the last decade, 2009 to 2018, of 260 homicides, 7 fewer than the previous decade, 140 involve firearms. Madam Deputy Chair, if you ever spend any time on social media, I'm sure you will have seen recent videos of Barbadian young men dancing in fetes with firearms that I'm told are AK-47. The kinds of firearms that are being discovered at crime scenes. At a recent crime scene involving an 18-year-old, a Glock 40 was found. A Glock 40. That is what we have to deal with today. Madam Chair, this is not a situation that can be turned around overnight. I've given you spiraling figures over the last 30 years. It may be difficult to pinpoint its genesis, but the fact of the matter is that it has taken a number of years to reach this proportion, and obviously to expect an overnight solution is really fanciful. In response, the members of the Royal Barbados Police Force have stepped up their level of activity. I think it is public knowledge now, and I want to thank them, all of them publicly, for this sacrifice. The members of the force have been asked to give up 2 days per month so as to be able to ensure that we have enough manpower to fight this particular scourge. In addition to that, we have also had to mobilize 80 troops from the 80 individuals from the Defense Force also to make sure that there are enough boots on the ground. Fighting this issue, though, notwithstanding that it will require an immediate response from the Royal Barbados Police Force, members of the public, members of Parliament, you should all recollect that the police tend to get called in after the event. What is important, therefore, is that as a society, we make an investment in preemptive measures. So there must be a homogeneous approach, not just fighting gun violence and the associated ills of drugs and so on, but it must be a homogeneous approach, Madam Chair, between fighting crime as a whole and our social services. Perhaps the most glaring default of our country in the last 10 years has been the decline in building social capital. Yes, there have been a few things. People talk about football tournaments and so on, but a football tournament will last 3 months of a year. What happens the next 9 months? A basketball tournament may go on for 2 or 3 weeks. But what happens all the rest of the time? Or what happens to those people who are not interested in football and basketball and other things of that sort? So we have to invest in social capital, and that investment has to be through work in our primary schools, through work in our tertiary institutions, and all of the other avenues. Perhaps the most important message that any parliament can convey to its citizens is that fighting crime may be the policeman's job, but fighting crime is everybody's responsibility. The police get paid on a day-to-day basis to deal with the criminal interlopers, but it is the responsibility of you and me and every single one of us, whether you live in Oistins or in Bridgetown, to ensure that such things as need to be rooted out of our societies that are within our responsibility, that we seize those opportunities. Madam Chair, in addition to a response in terms of law enforcement, though, we also have to mirror that with a response in terms of the greater efficacy of our justice system. It is to our eternal embarrassment that we should have over 1,000 matters awaiting trial and indictment. Madam Chair, there used to be a time when we had assizes, but assizes have been a thing of the past now, I think, for more than 10 years. So, as curious as it seems, we have what is called continuous assizes. And we have 2 judges who are constantly working in those continuous assizes. In other words, 2 full-time criminal judges. But notwithstanding that, the number of indictable matters awaiting trial has skyrocketed to over 1,000. This creates other problems. It means that a large number of people who are charged will either be on remand or be on bail. If they're on remand, then we have a situation where human rights issues arise because a person who has not been found guilty of an offense is kept in prison and may ultimately be found innocent. But on the other hand, individuals who have been charged with serious offenses are given bail, and there are numerous instances, and the Criminal Justice Research Unit will be able to give you those figures, where a large number of those individuals come back out and are then charged with other serious offenses. So the revolving door that is the prison in relation to bail and so on is not exactly working as it should be. Our system of justice is one that attempts to give an individual a fair trial, and they believe that we succeed in that largely. But an individual doesn't get a fair trial, and a society doesn't get a fair break when you have a criminal case waiting for 10 years to be heard. It's in the country's interest, it's in the interest of the accused, it's in the interest of the victims that justice should be delivered swiftly. In order to discharge this particular mandate, we have just amended the Supreme Court of Judicature Act to increase the overall number of judges. When fully implemented, Madam Chair, this will see a total of 4 full-time criminal court judges working to try not just to reduce the backlog, but to ensure that the numbers are always manageable. The sooner individuals are either brought to justice or freed, then we believe that stability will begin to show its face in our society. But 1,000 cases, even if you have 20 judges, that will still take a number of years to reduce. The Director of Public Prosecutions has been given a mandate to examine all of those cases, prioritize the homicides, and those cases that fall far lower on the scale, either in terms of not being as serious as others, or those cases where, due to the passage of time and so on, it may be difficult to secure a conviction. The DPP has been directed to look at those cases and determine what cases the Crown would no longer wish to pursue. I believe you're looking at me because my 15 minutes is up.
No,
Almost?
almost.
Almost, thank you, ma'am. So when once the DPP, though...
Your 10 minutes is up. Your 15 minutes that you made up is not yet.
Well, thank you for allowing me a little flight of imagination, at least as far as time is concerned. But the point is, though, that the system and all of the parts of that system have to work together. The judicial system has to deliver justice. A well-known Barbadian jurist in Bermuda said to me that they had similar issues in relation to instability as a result of, as it turns out, murder cases and so on coming up for trial 6 and 7 and 8 years after. But he points out that as soon as they started to have murder trials taking place within 9 and 10 months, people began to recognize that justice is now and thereafter swift, and they begin to rethink how they respond in certain situations. Thank you for your indulgence, ma'am. I look forward to our engagement, and I beg to move that Head 30 stand part.
Thank you. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning to everybody, to the Honorable Attorney General and his team, and thank them for coming to the Parliament today to interact with us on these very important matters. I concur with the view implied by the Honorable Attorney General that justice is one of the principal planks in our democracy, and that as a society, whatever our constraints might be, we have to do as much as is tangibly and concretely possible to ensure that the justice system works. Now, beyond the appointment of additional judges, the establishment of new courts, the efforts at law reform, law review, which are all very commendable and to which this Parliament has given some attention recently. Beyond these things, the question still remains as to whether justice in Barbados, the survival of our democracy, the survival of our way of life, and the improvement and development of our way of life, these things are all very significantly dependent upon the state of health with reference to our justice system. I have to make the point that it is still my view that the recent adjustment to the method relative to the appointment of judges in Barbados remains fairly cosmetic and superficial, and that it renders the system and the process still subject to political contrivance. I believe that we have, with respect to that, advanced the situation very little positively with the recently adopted method and process for the appointment of judges. Ma'am, I believe that as a society we have to tackle more robustly the growing problem of crime in Barbados. I repeat the call for a genuine national platform for dialogue vis-a-vis our national response to crime. We have to be more strategic, and I think I heard that call in the words of the Attorney General. We have to attack not only the symptoms, but the causes. And the major causes, I would think, relative to the problem of crime in Barbados to date have been known to us for some time, and they revolve around home and family life, the school situation, and the extent to which that problem of crime is conduced by those factors. There are also the factors relative to poverty that gender that particular evil for us, and there are those occasioned by our shift in values of what I consider to be a state of moral meandering. I think that as a nation, we're somewhat lost in a moral maze, and the adult population and the leadership population right across the board, inclusive of the church, is sending mixed signals to those who look upon the adults for leadership and for guidance. We have to address what I call citizenship ideals formation and values preservation. We have to further the process of penal reform. We have to address matters of juvenile justice, restorative as well as restitutionary, what I call restitutionary justice issues, victim support, and I also believe very strongly, ma'am, compensation for those who unfortunately are wrongfully accused, detained for extended period of time, then found not to be guilty, and released, but released to a totally changed life context, totally changed life choices and situation. And I'm not talking with those who beat the court and the court's verdict on technical grounds. I'm talking about people who clearly have been wrongfully accused, and in the context of a justice system which is not efficient and which conduces to long delays, then such people suffer for a long time to come back to find that the life of the past is totally lost and totally changed. I believe there should be serious consideration for proper compensation to such people. Ma'am, I very strongly believe we have to take the class bias out of investigations and prosecutions of the criminal element in Barbados. We have to go after, in a more apparent and convincing fashion, the big boys group involved especially in organized criminal activity in Barbados. This is not something that is related to any particular party in government. It is a part of our culture that those who come from the Back Ivy or Black Rock are quickly caught, prosecuted after a while, and locked away. Whereas those who come from the brighter spots of Barbados, and sometimes those who wear a fairer color or are adorned by a brighter hue, are left unassaulted by our efforts at both investigation and prosecution. I believe strongly, ma'am, we have to provide for improved police services in Barbados. We have to take the politics out of both policing and prosecutions, as I said. And I repeat the call, I've said it about 5 times already. I strongly hold the view that we have to pay our police officers more than they are being paid for serving us in the way they do in the current context, which all signals suggest will get worse to their detriment and exposure before it gets better. And I believe they ought to be properly compensated once we come out of these economic quicksands in which we find ourselves at this time, which gender the constraints which prevent us perhaps at the moment from addressing that issue, but we have to pay our police more. I'll continue to put the view until it is heard that we have more than a crime problem in Barbados. We have a problem with law and order. We have a law and order problem, which is a broader view of the current evil that obtains than seeing it as a crime problem. I look in these estimates, and the status quo obtains that the bulk of funding is given to education and to health, and understandably so, because we have as a nation to ensure that those social services are properly provided for. But I believe that we have now reached a stage where we have to see law and order as an equal competitor for state funding with education and health, because the Attorney General and those responsible for administration of justice in Barbados, preservation of law and order in Barbados, must be given the resources. We cannot hold back here, because if we fail in this regard, then all the benefits served to us by our investments in health and education fall prey to a climate in which law and order itself is a victim because of the lack of adequate funding. So I make a strong call for increase of funding for law and order to a point where, in that regard, it more competes with education and health for resource funding. We must, Madam Chair, recommit to reversing the very corrosive shift that comes as a result of inadequate funding, inadequate resources of all types, human resource, equipment resources, to the police and other aspects of the justice system. So there's a law and order problem we have to address. There are two examples, if you would give me a moment, ma'am, just to refer to. We've seen it all before, and it happened just a couple of days, I think both of them on the same day. And I was accompanied driving up Roebuck Street, stopped at the junction of Roebuck Street and Pinfold Street, stopped at a bold red light, ma'am. The lights were in the process of changing. Stopped at a bold red light. The only vehicle stopped there, only to be overtaken hurriedly by a reckless act of madness. A taxi driver, Z401, ma'am, if you can do anything about it. Z401, a taxi, station wagon, I think it was. And I could not believe my eyes. I mean, I've seen somewhat of this before, but this was the most wanton and reckless exhibit of that type of craziness and disrespect for law and order that I witnessed. And then, ma'am, I have, unfortunately, to say, you know, we have to lead by example. But just in this Parliament on Friday night, the ongoings reflected a disrespect for the rule of law, even in this honorable House of Law. I thought that the goings-on reflected a disrespect to the officers of the House, the clerks at the table, reflected a disrespect to the chairperson, chairman of committees. It reflected a disrespect to the Speaker of the House and to the non-cabinet members of this honorable chamber. And I know, ma'am, in moments such as we were faced with on Friday night, necessity drives our actions, and necessity is said to be a thing that genders invention. But, ma'am, necessity can easily also become the mother of mischief. And I think if from this chamber perhaps we don't send better signals that we ourselves respect rules and law and order, then we're likely to be caught up in that national disregard for the systems under which we seek to better govern ourselves. I don't want to take too much time. I wanted to put those things on the table, and I look forward to the Honorable Attorney General and his team sharing much with us with reference to these estimates on the issue with the justice in Barbados.
Thank you. The committee is now open to questioning. I just want to remind our guests in the well that you have 5 minutes to answer your questions. And to the MPs, and to remind you to state your name and position. Your mics will be turned on for you, so no need to worry about that. To the MPs, you have 3 minutes to pose your question and 2 follow-up supplemental questions. Let's start with the MP for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask the Honourable Attorney General specifically about the significant delay that people have been having obtaining the police certificates of character. Many times constituents approach us as members of Parliament to write resumes for them or reference letters as they've been offered a job for whatever reason, or even to travel. And sometimes the job window might only be a week, 2 weeks, and they go and apply for police certificate of character, which could take up to 6 weeks. And by that time, the job has been given to somebody else, and it causes tremendous pain and dislocation. And I would ask, what new procedures and what has your office put in place to be able to improve this significant problem of having to wait so long for a police certificate of character?
Thank you, Member for Christchurch West. This particular issue is one that has seen us going from bad to worse. Police certificates of character are now considered to be par for the course when people are applying for jobs and so on. It reflects, I suppose, a certain level, and perhaps it's unfortunate that we're so suspicious of people that they now have to prove that they are not guilty of an offense. I would point out to this chamber that there are many countries in the world that do not issue police certificates of character. An individual is truly innocent until proven otherwise. But for the longest time, police certificates of character have been a requirement, and it used to be a requirement, I think, too, for the Ministry of Public Works among general workers, but that's been relaxed now. That's been relaxed. So while government has, in the lower level of employees, relaxed that requirement, many enterprises across Barbados are insisting that before they employ you, you have to have a certificate of character. And while I don't know the specific numbers of applicants, I suspect that it has increased tremendously over the years. The current situation is one that is unacceptable. Part of it will be solved through use of technology. And I can say to you that in my discussions with the members of the force, specifically the Commissioner and his High Command, I've indicated to them that I want to see the process of certificates of character being shortened from sometimes 2 months to just a matter of days, perhaps 2 to 3 days. And I don't think that there's any reason why this could not be so. In order to be able to achieve that, the data relating to criminal records has to be digitized. And a supplementary has just been sought and obtained in the Ministry of Home Affairs, where the police formerly sat until just 2 months ago, for the digitization of all of the criminal records. Now, this is key because we need to ensure that the process of applying for and granting, issuing a certificate of character is a completely digital process. Right now, you have to appear at the police at the office, and that raises another issue because the people who staff the office are police officers, when in truth and in fact, I don't think they need to be police officers. It's something that could be done by civilian staff. But then you pay your fee, you get your fingerprints checked, and the data is there, but there's still some records that are not, there's still some records that are not digitized. So with the full digitization of the data, which would also see more recent convictions entered into the system as well, we would be able to issue the certificate of character within a matter of days. And let me say that what happens is an individual may be convicted, let's say in District F, but the information of his conviction does not get entered into the system simultaneously. It may take days, it may even take weeks before it gets entered into the system. So that when you apply, the police go through their records, but then they have to go through all of the other records that are available to see, just in case there's a conviction that they might not have noted. In addition to that, though, we want to see the process be less time-consuming. So the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology has been asked to create an app so that an individual who wants to apply for a certificate of character can actually complete the application on a mobile phone. There's no special reason why you still have to go and stand up and go through that process. The one thing that will have to be done in person is that your fingerprints need to be taken in person. But if that is all you have to appear to do, then it will significantly shorten the processing time. It is an embarrassment to all of us that individuals lose jobs and lose job opportunities simply because a police certificate of character cannot be issued to them within a matter of days. And I too have had constituents who have cried out to me because, you know, they got to go for a job interview next week, but they can't get an interview, can't get an appointment. Right now, appointments, you apply for passports online. You apply for Barbados passports online. So we're going to digitize the complete process, and I can say to you that the benchmark that we're looking for will be about 2 to 3 days.
Follow-up question?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Because I have a follow-up to that. Obviously, people go for police certificate of character because other people want to know what your record is and what your record has been over the years. And it brings me to this idea of having records expunged. Now, clearly, the concept or ideas, I believe, of incarcerating somebody is not just to keep them away from society, but also to rehabilitate that person after that particular mistake that they would have made that offended society. And I would like to ask the Honourable Attorney General, because I recognize that the process for having your records expunged also seems to be a not significantly long time as well for people to have their records expunged. And I would ask, what improvements or what plans do you have in place so that if someone made a mistake, say 10, 12 years ago, or whatever the particular regulations are with respect to expungement, that they can get those records expunged in a good and timely manner, and so that people understand what criteria they have to adhere to in order to have a record expunged. And if you could give them some guidance on that.
Let me say that I think part of our challenge is that individuals only seek to have the criminal records expunged when it arises. And there's then a mad dash because an individual applies for a certificate of character, and then because they want to apply for a job, interview is next week, and they can't get the certificate of character. Now, this piece of legislation, the Criminal Records Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, was passed in 1997, and it was forward-thinking at that time. But I think what is bedeviling the system is the absence of a public awareness process which sees people recognizing that they have the right in certain instances to have their record expunged. But almost invariably, we get this mad dash, and then that results in a fair amount of backlog as well, to have a record expunged simply because there's something coming up. It is a right that is given under the statute for people in certain circumstances to have their record expunged. And when they fall into the category, they should quite simply arrange to have it done in a timely fashion. But in addition to that, it is not so much, it isn't as simple as saying, well, I have not been convicted of another offense in such a period of time. When an applicant files his application with all of the recommendations and so on, the police still have to be involved in the process, because it isn't just a question of whether you have been convicted, but it is also relevant whether you are currently under investigation or whether you may be playing another role, something of that sort. So with the challenges that the force has to contend with in terms of the availability of manpower, even when you get your application in and all of the boxes are checked, it still has to come back to the police force so that they can offer an opinion. The police are a vital part of their process. There have been instances where Barbadians have sought to have their records expunged, but since their last conviction in Barbados, they have been charged with offenses in other countries in the Caribbean. One or two notable cases come to mind. So it isn't just a case of saying, I have not been charged, I've not been convicted with an offense in Barbados, and therefore let me apply. There's still the background work that has to happen. I will say that I think that the process is altogether too long, and the time has come. As I said, this legislation was passed now over 20 years ago, and the time has come for reform. We have to look at the rehabilitation of offenders in a broader context. As it stands, the categories of individuals who can apply for expungement are very limited. But there are individuals where people have been well and truly rehabilitated and looking to make the most of a new life, but because they fall outside of the category of offenses, then they simply can't have their records expunged, and therefore they are forever damned and doomed by our society. So I've asked the Criminal Records Expungement Board to look at the various categories and see what opportunities there are for us to broaden the scope of expungements. I have to say that I've met some wonderful people who I think really deserve another opportunity. They've turned their lives around completely, but because they don't fall within that narrow list of categories, there's nothing that we can do about expunging their records. So I think that we have to broaden the categories of individuals so that we can give other individuals a serious chance at getting ahead with their lives.
My final follow-up question, therefore, to the Attorney General is on the topic of incarceration and also the use of technology. We're aware that in many other jurisdictions, they use technology, for instance, ankle monitoring. In fact, some former people who are in this House have experienced that. And I would like to ask if your office is looking or exploring the opportunities for, rather than incarcerating people, for instance, for being in contempt of court for not paying child support, using ankle bracelet monitoring. The reason I ask that is because I always found it unfair that a person who may not have been able to pay child support and then has to go to jail for a period of time, loses his job, and then by extension cannot continue to pay child support because he's been found in contempt of court and that sort of thing. So I'm asking, are there other sentencing, such as using electronic monitoring rather than incarcerating people at this time?
The honourable member, I think, has confused the situation where an individual is sent up, quote unquote, where they have not paid maintenance to being incarcerated in the normal sense. So before I answer your question, let me just make it clear that an individual who is sent to Dodds for non-payment of maintenance is sent there not as an act of incarceration, but is sent there because they have committed a contempt of court. That is the punishment that the court imposes on you for being in contempt of the court's order. I don't know that a situation where you would then put an individual who is in contempt of court in an ankle bracelet would have the same effect. In relation to the use of technology, though, as an aid to controlling people's behavior and so on, this particular measure is already contemplated by our Penal Reform Act. We've not yet taken any steps to implement it, but I think that there are good reasons now why we have to go in that direction. There are numerous instances where people, before convictions, before they go to trial, and you know, the case gets called and they can be sent up on remand. There are numerous instances where you don't actually have to confine that person. They may not have been charged with an offense of the severity or of the risk profile that would require them to be sent up DODS pending release on bail. Such an individual could very usefully be equipped with a monitoring device so as to be able to you know, keep track of their whereabouts and so on. In addition to that, it is from time to time a condition of bail that individuals have to report to the police station every Monday or 2 or 3 times a week, generally to make sure that they're still in jurisdiction. The use of monitoring devices like the ankle bracelets and so on could also solve that problem. A number of entities in Barbados have submitted proposals to the Ministry of Home Affairs and to the Ministry of the Attorney General, and I can say that a careful look will be taken. In many instances, it may be that you don't need to incarcerate an individual. They don't need to be sent to DODS. But that limitation on their ability to come and go as they please may well be considered to be an effective tool. So it is very much within our contemplation. No money has been made available in the estimates for it at this time, however, and that is perhaps regrettable, but there are certain limitations that we have with the financial strictures at this point. But certainly it is something that is being actively considered both by the Ministry of Home Affairs and by the Office of the Attorney General.
From my own knowledge, AG, you mentioned overseas jurisdiction with respect to expungement of records. If they have a record in another territory, does that apply for the police certificate of character too? Do y'all check with the other islands? And if not, the IT will match that, or that's not necessary?
We don't, Madam Chair, thank you for your question. We don't check other jurisdictions when it comes to police certificates of character.
Okay.
The certificate just deals with your standing in our jurisdiction. But I mentioned the situation in relation to expungement because the individuals who were seeking expungement here were actively engaged in criminal activity elsewhere, and therefore we could not, it would have been madness, and I'm talking about very serious criminal activity, it would have been madness to agree to expunge their record in Barbados in those circumstances.
Thank you very much. Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
Honourable Attorney General, first let me commend you on the work that you've been doing recently. To be honest, I really would not like to be in your shoes,
Again,
but I think you're ably treading water. With what has been going on in Barbados recently, do we have any plans in place to create a more permanent presence by the police in certain districts? I know we have community outposts, the police have community outposts in some areas. I know that there's a construction of that police station close over by the garrison that I believe it was open, technically. What is the plan to increase the permanent police presence in the districts? Do we plan to build more police stations? If so, is that on the cards for this year?
thank you very much, Minister. The physical plant in many of the police stations has been in deplorable condition for many years. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen a number of new stations built, a new station in Speightstown to replace the old District E. We've seen a new station in Horse Hill to replace the old District F police station. And recently we've seen the opening of, well, the completion of construction of a station at Cane Gardens, St. Thomas. The station at Hastings is incomplete. Sorry, yes, but that is to replace the existing Hastings station and the Worthing station. So those 2 stations are being combined and relocated to that nearby facility. There are other stations that we have to seriously consider their usefulness and practicability in today's Barbados. It has been known for a long time, for example, that the station at District C really does not serve as a proper functioning police station. That was a police station that worked when Barbados was an agricultural economy in the 1920s and 30s and prior to that. It does not work in a modern Barbados. In fact, for the longest time, we have known that the best place for a new station for St. Philip would actually be in 6 Roads. Belle Plaine also needs to have a police facility returned to Belle Plaine. But Minister, there are certain obvious challenges that we face. We have to reduce our deficit to 60% by the year 2030, which means that we have to manage very carefully our debt profile. As long as the economy grows, and these are matters that the Minister of Finance and her colleague ministers in the ministry will be better poised to answer than me, but from where I sit as Attorney General, as long as the growth in our economy is seen over the next few years, I will certainly be making a demand, if I can use such a strong term, of the Minister of Finance that we look seriously at re-establishing a police station in Belle Plaine, locating in 6 Roads a modern police station that suits the parish with the fastest growing population in the country, and also if that happens, the station at Boarded Hall will be moved as well. So I can say to the Honourable Minister that there are plans for new stations, but the reality is that there's no provision in this year's estimates for them, simply because the Barbadian economy at this point can't sustain those particular investments. I can say, though, that we have to be mindful that buildings is just one way of addressing the situation, the issue of police conditions. You can build all the new fancy buildings that you like, but unless we ensure that police are properly trained, that they have better terms and conditions, that they have the availability of technology, that they have the resources that they need, then really we're not going to be achieving anything. It is said that one police officer remarked that police stations are for the public, not the police. Now, however you interpret that, I think he went on to explain that police are so often out on the road that they spend little time in the station. And that's the reality. Now, the question therefore is, how do we adequately deploy our police resources? How do we adequately service them? How do we make sure our police are properly equipped in a situation where the physical plant is not exactly as we would like it? And that is our challenge. In relation to the new station at Hastings, I can tell the Honourable Member that there have been significant delays in that particular project. It is nearing completion, and I am told by the project unit in the ministry that we expect to be able to have it open and handed over to the police in June or July of this year. That station is is perhaps overbuilt in many respects. I have to say that if I had the responsibility at that time, it might not have been such a large edifice. It is replete with multiple conference rooms. I think it has 2 cafeterias and things of that sort. And really, it is perhaps money that could have been spent otherwise. But I want to say to the minister that we have police stations on very valuable real estate. And to the extent that the Ministry of Finance would be willing to accommodate a proposal, it would be good if we could see the real estate that those stations currently stand on, if it's possible to segregate those resources, to see that real estate disposed of, put into other use, and those funds made available for the construction of other police stations. The member for St. Andrew has made me promise on pain of death and torture that the police station I promised him when he was last Attorney General over 10 years ago, that he would not look on me kindly if we didn't deliver. And of course, St. Andrew adjoins St. Joseph, and the health and prosperity of St. Andrew is good for St. Joseph. But our reality is going to be whether we have enough growth to justify the new stations. There is a definite need for a new station in 6 Roads, a definite need for a new station in Belle Plaine. The member of St. Thomas will be happy to know that we hope to see the station at Cane Garden being handed over to the community of St. Thomas as a functioning police station in very short order, when the court moves out.
Madam Chair, through you, Attorney General, about a year ago I was doing something entirely different. That was my bread and butter. And as a lawyer in private practice, I was consistently frustrated by the pace at which the Solicitor General's office worked. This is not any slur on the Solicitor General who is here, but from the time I came into practice, the pace of litigation, which was controlled by the government, was painful. The cases drag on for years. Actually, the bulk of the cases, I would hazard a guess, that contribute towards the backlog in the civil cases are ones that involve the Crown. And this has serious implications on the Crown in respect of money as well, not just time wasted, but direct dollars and cents, because when the court eventually gives its decision in a case and it awards damages to somebody, there's an interest component that starts to run from way back from the filing of the writ. So I would like to know, Attorney General, the last couple of years have been torturous in particular. What are the plans to speed up the system in the SG's chambers? People talk about private lawyers, but I will tell the public of Barbados that the private conduct of litigation is leaps and bounds above what comes out of the SG's chambers. And I believe it has to do with lack of resources, because I don't know how many lawyers there are in the SG's chambers, but I think they're probably less than 10 litigators servicing all of the cases for the Crown. So, AG, what is on the cards to deal with this?
Thank you, Minister. I have with me the Solicitor General, and I will ask her to give you a direct response. Let me say, though, that I think it is apparent that the SG's office needs to have greater staffing in terms of lawyers who are able to go to court. Let me say this: the Solicitor General's chambers advises the Crown on all matters that are not criminal. This week it might be looking at a memorandum of understanding between Barbados and China. Next week it might be a CARICOM treaty. The week after that it might be, or the day after that, it might be matters relating to contracts for the construction of a sewage treatment plant. And you had, so every single non-criminal matter has to pass through the SG's chambers, and with good reason. But the reality is that with the number of attorneys that we have, I think it numbers at 16 now?
We have 18 present.
18 present and 2 vacant posts. We have a Solicitor General and 3 Deputy Solicitors General. So the raft of things that the SG's office has to contend with is vast. But I'll ask the Solicitor General if she could address you more directly.
Thank you, AG. Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Jennifer Edwards, Solicitor General. And through you, I would like to respond to the honourable member. I think the Attorney General
Could you
has
pull the
charged-
mic a little closer, please?
You got to put the chair closer.
Oh,
If possible.
Madam Chair, maybe for future sittings, if you could get the mic brought a little bit nearer.
It's too far.
is it good?
Try it now.
Is it better? Okay, thank you.
You need to lean forward.
Okay. Just to put it in context as to what the Chambers does, it advises the Crown on all aspects of constitutional, public, and civil law. It represents the state in constitutional, public, and civil law proceedings. It prepares now that I will go on with the Solicitor General's functions in particular. Solicitor General advises the Governor General and all ministries and departments of government. As I said earlier, it represents the Crown from the High Court to the CCJ. It negotiates and settles claims out of court. We don't really keep the statistics as such as the savings, but I can say that we have managed to save the Crown this year $3,300,000. We advise on the Crown's international relations as well. We participate in negotiating bilateral and multilateral treaties. We research law for the Attorney General. We vet financial documents relating to loan agreements and bond issues for the domestic and international markets. We also represent the chambers on various statutory boards, both locally and regionally and internationally. These include, but are not limited to, the Judicial Council, the Rules Committee, the Community Legal Services Commission, the Immigration Committee, Betting and Gaming Committee, Archives Committee, Anti-Money Laundering Authority, Advisory Committee on Intellectual Property, Telecom Subcommittee, Tenders Committee, Ad Hoc Projects Committee, Intergovernmental Task Force. We also represent the government at CARICOM and the Council of Legal Education, and the Law Ministers Conference and the senior law officers. And having gone through the list of duties of the Solicitor General, perhaps I should tell you the staffing resources of the Solicitor General. As the AG said, there is a Solicitor General and 3 deputies. The 3 deputies head 3 sections of the chambers: the litigation section, the contract section, and the advisory section. The litigation section consists of 6 officers. That will just make it clear that anytime any of those officers are absent for any reasons, it presents a significant problem, because when something comes up, you have to look for to go to court if they're home sick or if they are acting out of the chambers. And officers are taken out of the chambers now to act in different departments of government. Before, it was only 3 departments: the registry, the judiciary, and the magistracy. Now there are several more departments they're taken from to act. When the officer is taken away, nobody substitutes for that officer. So we're one officer short. Sometimes I'm in the position where I have to take an officer from the contract section and send them down to court to get an adjournment, because there's nobody in the litigation section to do it. What we've tried doing recently is to assign the cases to 2 officers when it's a particular type of case, so that if one is away for any reason, the other one can handle it. It has not always been successful. We will have to look to refine it. But just let me say, I have reports from 10 of the officers, and between those 10 officers, there are 611 cases. Matters, because some are advisory, some are contracts, some are litigation. That does not include all the matters, because the AG has asked me to do an audit of the cases, of the files in the chambers that are in the registry that nothing has happened to. For some time, for one reason or another, I've been finding that it is because the private lawyers have not written anything. So sometimes we invite claims and it takes very long to get a response. As I was going through the staffing, though, I got diverted. There are 11 senior principal crown counsel. They are bracketed, and there are 5 crown counsel. Well, I'm now short of one principal senior crown and a crown. When the crown counsel come into the chambers, very often they are not familiar with government legal work, so you have to train them. As soon as we train them and they get to middle management, where they're knowledgeable of the various aspects, they are moved to another department. So we are constantly starting all over again. The delays are, the reasons for the delays are many. As I say, I think my staffing is the same as in the 1980s, when we used to get perhaps 18 cases a year. In the last 3 years, we have 72 new cases in 2015-16, 89 in 2016-17, and 92 so far for 17-18. That is in the High Court. In the Court of Appeal, there was 2 in 2015-16, 5 in 2016-17, and 8 in 2017-18. We also do public trustee matters. And these, I know it is a concern. It's for the members generally, and it's a concern for us too, because to be able to get these matters out. Regrettably, the legal assistant who used to deal with this matter, he retired 3 years ago, and then I only had 2 legal assistants remaining, and I had to take one of those 2 and assign to public trustee. So I only had 1 legal assistant then to do searches, file documents, have stamp duty adjudicated.
You have about a few seconds to finish up your answer. Just let you know.
I beg your pardon?
A few seconds to finish up your answer.
Yes. So the problems are very, very varied, and it includes getting information to respond. When we ask for information from ministries, sometimes it's very difficult to get it. And that causes us a delay as well. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Does that, Madam Chair, do I get my own 5 minutes?
Sure.
I can't take your 5 minutes.
In this regard, I think that we can't keep doing the same thing all the time and expect a better result. A number of ministries and departments have their own lawyers. But when a matter arises, somehow or another, it gets bumped back up to the SG's office. And I think this is a failing in our planning, and it's a failing in how individual ministries are managing resources, and I am committed to trying to wrestle this to the ground. So, for example, the Ministry of Public Works has, I think, 2 legal officers. But there are certain matters, and they're fully trained, as the SG explained, after she has nurtured them and trained them and so on, and they're what she called middle management, they get taken by other ministries to service their needs. But arrangements, for example, for these cases where your car drops in a pothole, over a certain amount of money, those cases still get referred back to the SG's office. And I've asked the SG if we can put a stop to that, because there's no reason why, if fully trained, you have 2 lawyers at Public Works, but just because a particular threshold is reached, at least Public Works, has to come back to the SG's office. That is a waste of resources as far as I'm concerned. The Ministry of the Public Service, I think the Public Service Commission also has a lawyer. They have a lawyer?
I think they have.
They have 2 lawyers, but yet still many public service matters get bumped back to the SG's office for advice. And it continues to drain our resources. And I'm discussing with the SG how we move to correct this failing. Departments ask for their own attorneys historically because of the delays that they face when they rely on the SG's chambers. So it is counterintuitive to ask for your own legal officers and then still send matters back to the SG's office to deal with. So the minister asked what our plans are. The SG and I have had the beginnings of a discussion to see how we can ensure that those departments that have their own attorneys, that they exercise their full powers as attorneys at law without coming back to the SG's office as backup.
Before you go on, is that office responsible for injuries at work? Because I know a few people that are waiting some 10 years or more to have that settled.
When you say at work, you mean in a
injuries
government
at work,
office, for example?
government, yeah, civil servants who have been injured while on the job.
Yes, this office is responsible for settling the personal injury claims against the Crown.
And the delays are for the same reasons given?
I believe it would be fair to say so, but I always tell, and like Minister Abrams up until recently was doing something else too, and I've always argued that the lawyers in the private bar have to keep the pressure on the lawyers in the SG's office. I don't want to ascribe blame, but I've seen some files where on both sides nothing has happened for years. So individuals in the private bar will make a claim against the Crown, and then they will sit for 4 years and write back again. But at the end of that time, they will say, well, the SG's office is taking long. Yes, the SG's office does have challenges in relation to its manpower and so on, but the members of the private bar have to bear an equal amount of blame for not properly and expeditiously advancing their client's case.
Madam Chair, just for clarity, I was in no way casting aspersion on the competence of the persons in the AG's office. I have, and the Solicitor General's chambers, I have the utmost respect for most of them. My point simply was that the system and the way things are done there lead to the delays. You cannot give a junior person a file this morning to come to court and expect them to make any meaningful contribution. So the delays that are par for the course in the system, and I'm glad to hear that the AG has said that we can't keep doing things the same way, so I look forward to some speed there. The last question, under the Parliamentary Council Services, that is sub-program 246. I note here, AG, that prior to 2017, 2018, there was nothing in there for professional services. The approved estimates 2018, 2019 had 50,000. The revised estimates, what was actually spent was 15,000. But this year and going forward, we're looking at a figure of $450,000 for professional services. Can you please explain what those are and why the difference?
Yes, Minister. The Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel is perhaps the unsung hero of the parliamentary and administrative process of Barbados. In recent years, they have been inundated with a lot of requests to draft legislation, and much of it has been time-bound. So, for example, in the last 6 weeks of December, the last 6 weeks of last year, ending 31st December, the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel was required to draft 14 pieces of legislation that had to be passed in their entirety by the end of the year. We had to take a decision as to how we were going to achieve this, and it became necessary to engage the services of a former Chief Parliamentary Counsel as a consultant. Now, with what we know has to happen going forward on all fronts in relation to legislative drafting requirements and the speed with which we have to respond, it was felt that we needed to make sensible budgetary provision so as to be able to bring in outside services to assist with drafting where necessary. So far for the year, we've had to engage outside assistance in drafting, I think it's about 9 different pieces of legislation. And there are other pieces of legislation that we have to grapple with in very short order. The Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office has had the responsibility of producing Money Laundering and Instrumentalities of Crime Act. The Integrity and Public Life Bill is still with them, arising out of the work in the Select Committee. There are a large number of pieces of legislation that are required to be drafted for various ministries that we're trying to grapple with. The office is simply inundated. The logical and practical way of dealing with this, therefore, instead of having the work of government grind to a halt because we can't get our legislative instruments out fast enough, has been to engage counsel. It would be a good thing to increase the size of the department, but drafting is a specialized skill. Everybody can't be a draftsman. Several people have done the masters in legislative drafting at the university, but drafting perhaps is like medicine, Madam Chair. You still have to practice, you still have to do your internship. And in order to be able to get your legal drafting done right, you need to put the task before someone who has a substantial amount of practical experience. So therefore, it is anticipated, Minister, that for this coming financial year, in order to ensure that we keep pace with the need to produce complex pieces of legislation in very short order, it will be necessary for us to engage services outside of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel office to draft legislation for us.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A pleasant good morning to the Attorney General and his team, certainly. I want to thank the Attorney General, first of all, for his pellucid presentation today. Albeit it was 5 minutes extra, but I hold no malice to the Chairman. It was worth every single second of it. I want to say that the mission statement certainly and your ministry's strategic goal is something that we look forward to over the next year, and you have certainly hit the ground running. It was really called a Usain Bolt moment. I am saying, my question to you today as Minister of Youth and Community Empowerment, what is your ministry's plan to involve communities in the fight, and certainly our young people, in the fight to wrestle the scourge of crime and violence and bring it to a stage of imprisonment? So that is really my question. How would we involve communities in this fight? Because I believe that communities play an integral role in the fight against not only crime and violence, but to ensure there is a level of normalcy in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And I will ask the Commissioner of Police to weigh in, but by way of introductory remarks, I think in my opening presentation, I talked about the need for a homogeneous approach to ensuring safety and security in Barbados. And I pointed out that in my view, that homogeneous approach required a solid meshing of policing with social care kinds of activity. In our recent national security briefing of stakeholders, the National Security Council, chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister, felt it was important that we not only brief parliamentarians and brief the social partnership, but that we should also brief all of the various heads of government departments who benefit from millions and millions of dollars in government funding every year, and say to them that they have to put their shoulder to the wheel in helping to rescue our society. There are statistics that show that, and I can refer specifically to statistics in relation to firearm usage. The vast number, well, let me be more precise. Among the individuals, among the 1,836 persons arrested and charged with firearm offenses for the period between 2010 and 2017, a large number of them were high school dropouts. I think the figure is 27.5% of the individuals charged with firearm offenses during that period were high school dropouts. Now, that should tell us, and the median age at which those individuals discontinued school was 15 years old. 27% of the 1,800 charged with firearm offenses were high school dropouts, and the median age of dropping out was 15. Now, if we don't get our youth policy right, if we don't get it right and get it right the first time, we are doing nothing more than churning out fodder for the criminal element. A person, before they hire you for a job, will ask you how much CXCs you have. What are your interpersonal skills? What is your vision for the future and all that kind of thing? People in this particular age cohort don't get interviewed for criminal positions. The criminal element will suck them all up, plain and simple. And therefore, if we don't fully engage the Ministry of Youth, then we have little chance of wrestling this problem to the ground. You know, people talk about the older criminals. Statistics show that an individual who is in his 40s and so on start to view life a little differently, perhaps because by then they have children and grandchildren and so on, and you know, some of them start to pull away from the mainstream of criminal activity. But we have young men, as I mentioned to the chamber earlier, an 18-year-old man, a young man, and a Glock was in his possession. So, Minister, I'm going to ask the Commissioner of Police to speak, but in my view, the ministry with the responsibility for youth and they have to add to that the ministry with the responsibility for education, are going to be the gatekeepers to ensure that we wrestle this issue of criminal activity to the ground. Commissioner?
Madam Chair, my name is Tyrone Griffith, Commissioner of Police. Just to add to the Honorable Attorney General, recently, some of the comments that you would hear in mainstream media by certain persons who want to think that community policing is no longer with us. I would like to allay all fears in that regard. If you just look to the project in the Chapman Street, New Orleans area, community policing efforts there, anybody who would have interfaced with the officers who man that post will tell you that community policing is live and kicking. Those officers are totally embraced by those communities and do a fantastic job day out and day in. So had not for that intervention, I could assure you that that community is so volatile that we would not know how to manage the affairs there. I'm sure that what they do on a daily basis is outstanding. We continue to work with the youth. We also have engaged in the Princess Trust International Team Building Program, which have seen in excess of 80 persons to date graduated from the program and who have made a turnaround in their lives. And we are satisfied that programs like that coming out of the community policing effort will indeed ensure that our youth will have some support in order to eradicate some of the scourge of crime that we are seeing.
I don't have a follow-up. I just want to give the assurance to the Attorney General, of course, that he has the unequivocal support of the Ministry of Youth and his efforts certainly to ensure that our young people put down the weapons of destruction or alternatively take up the tools of empowerment. So I want to recommend the commitment of this ministry for sure. Thanks.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. George North.
Here for recognizing me. Honorable Attorney General, you, in your opening remarks, you felt that the social issues are very important in helping to tackle crime, and I could not disagree with you at all. I believe the social issues that you spoke of, health, education, but I want to zero in on one of the comments that was made by the member for St. Mike's of Christchurch West, the question of maintenance for children. I believe this is a very important point that we have to look at. There are too many young people cannot get their support out of the court, and it has caused a lot of problems. People turn up to the courts and they find empty treasuries there for them. There's no money in the court. Either the marshals or so on are not doing their jobs, or people do not think that they have to pay. Fathers leave children, and we have bare problems out there in the society. There's so many parents who complain in my constituency about not getting maintenance, and they are told by the court system that they have to come back. Some of them are so frustrated that they've decided for years we are not going back, and something has to be done. I believe that the time has come. I remember the last government tried to tackle that question of child maintenance, and they were putting money into the estimate at that time. The claim to help this situation. I believe the time has come for us to start to garnish wages. In other jurisdictions, the garnishment of wages for persons who refuse to pay is being done. What is being done by this department to ensure that a large number of young boys and girls, young people out there who go without food because parents, the men especially, are not putting money, what is being done to help this here? And what can be done from our end to ensure that people pay their fair share of maintenance?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'll ask the Registrar of the Supreme Court if she would weigh in on this particular issue.
Madam Chair, honorable members, good morning. My name is Barbara Calling, the Registrar of the Supreme Court. Your question, sir, is quite pertinent in respect of maintenance. We have one court that is electronic. That's the biggest jurisdiction, which is District A, and they have a software system that encourages and allows them to actually execute the cards for arrears and send them out and so on. The other courts and the outstations, they're all manual, going through ledgers, looking to see who has not paid money and so on. So some of the female actually have to activate that action of having the card, what we call executed for arrears. So the problem is that we have too much of a manual system in place in respect of that. With regard to the marshals, sir, sometimes you don't have a good address given by the applicant, or we have a first name, or we get ZR 47, and it's really hard to find persons when you don't have a correct address for them. Our marshals as well depleted. We have jurisdictions that have not yet been filled, but the Attorney General has assured me we will try and fill some of those as soon as we can. So there's some areas that don't have any magistrates, any marshals at all, and we have to rely on other persons to help us serve them. Like supervisors are not supposed to serve documents, but they would assist in the case of domestic violence application. So it's a question of resources that we don't have at present in respect of getting that done. We're looking in the midterm, I may say, Honorable Attorney General, and looking at the magistrate court, how we can actually improve the systems that we have there. We're looking at helping those persons who have to call or raise 2 bus fares to come to court here. There's no money. A system called Court Pay, which is in Trinidad and Tobago, we wish to adopt that. We don't need a bank account, actually. You can get a card from the court, a court card, and you can check at any ATM to see when the money is there to save yourself that bus fare as to coming up to find out exactly what is happening. We're looking at having a more robust system through all of the courts in respect of the maintenance, others become electronic. Our biggest court at present is understaffed, and with some pressure on that court to do what the system allows it to do, not enough hands to do that system. So I expect we may have put something in place as soon as possible, human resources-wise, to make sure that those thousands of persons who actually are in that court system at District A are not disadvantaged over this period. Yes, sir.
Follow-up question here is, what can be done to help those fathers who refuse to pay? Because I'm aware that there are many men who work and are working but refuse to pay because nobody goes after them. And I feel the time has come for us to look at garnishing of wages for persons who are not supporting, and the child are there not supporting their child. And it is a problem out there, and that's why we have the social issues in society. And if I don't know if the social services have carried out any interview or anything, but I believe the majority of deviant behavior we have out there is because children are not getting support and they do not have the wherewithal to go to school. What can be done to strengthen the court in these cases?
We do have the power to garnish wages and email before the court. At a steady job of employment, we can make an order that the employer send the money to the court, and that is being done throughout all of the maintenance courts. There are some who are not working regular, so there's a difficulty in garnishing where you're just doing odd jobs, but we do have that power as well. What the magistrates do is social engineering. They actually babysit the men. They come to court on arrears, and they see them at least once a month to ask them what is happening, and you can be guaranteed before the court date they will pay some money. There's a question of babysitting them in those cases. The ultimate is incarceration. That doesn't serve any purpose to anyone, really. So we have to look at other means in the 21st century to encourage them to actually pay the money to the court.
My final question is, do you have any resources at all to help mothers who turn up to the court often and find that there's no money for them? What do you do? How do you feel, what your department feel when mothers leave the court crying that they can't have no money to give those children, and then it is left for us as politicians to fit the bill? Because so many of them come to us and say, look, we definitely need some help. Or they go to the welfare department. They go to the welfare department and say, look, they're not getting help from the welfare department. They're not getting help from some politicians. But we have a big problem. So what do you do? And I saw a photograph recently in one of the leading papers showing ladies turn up to the court and they're leaving empty-handed. Some of them cry that the marshals are not, that the marshals know the fathers and they are not going after the case. And this is one of the, I don't know if it's true or not, but this is one of the beliefs that we have. How do you feel? What does your department do to help? Do you have any money to help?
All right, in respect of the ladies coming to the court and not getting any money, it goes both ways now with the amendment, so a man can come to court as well for maintenance under our amendment to our act. But there's not much we can do. We can't provide the money out of the air. There was a system in place. It was a one-off system before where there was money allotted for persons like that, but that was a one-off situation. And we were then mandated to actually secure that money back by having a man come to court to pay. But we don't have that facilities right now, so there's much that we can do. We hurt with them because we see the pain that they're going through trying to feed their children and there's nothing there to give them. So we do hurt with that. And I do understand your issue of women coming and there's nothing there for them. So.
Madam Chair, if I might, this issue of maintenance payments is one that has bedeviled the system now for, don't even want to say many years, I'd say generations. Some of the people whose mothers were trying to get maintenance for them have now grown up and have had children of their own. I am aware of a case with a constituent who asked me whether she could at that time collect 14 years of arrears. 14 years of arrears. The situation is one that I think is dehumanizing for women folk, and it really, in many respects, represents a failing of the system. For a long time, women have been forced to go and stand up at a court and wait in a line to see a court clerk, to be told, I am busy now, check back later. They have to manually check a card, a ledger, to see if any money has come in. The court martial, if you take a court, a magistrate's court, Horsehill has one. Horsehill Court, for example, has 2 marshals, one of whom will be in court whenever the court is sitting, and the other one would be the marshal who is out serving civil process. And you've heard the registrar say that sometimes the information given is hardly the kind of information that you could use to go after an individual. One of our responses, and it is a response that we committed to in our manifesto, Madam Chair, is to create a new family court regime which will see a combination of features. And I can say to the court that we expect to be able to implement much of the new family law court in the second half of this financial year. But what we want to do is to remove the indignity of having women who now have to go to court to get maintenance under Magistrates Court Act, under Maintenance Act, which will really be a Magistrates Court process. We want to remove those kinds of indignities and let those women know that they matter as much as those women who are dealt with under the Family Law Act. The matter of maintenance and its collection, it is a serious problem. I can tell the chamber that for December, I think District A alone had a total of $800,000 plus in maintenance payments. District A Court, District A Family Court processed a total of over $800,000 in payments in December. We've therefore asked the Ministry of Finance to look at a system which would operate across all of our courts. It would require the buy-in of all of our commercial banks, and I believe that discussions have been held with the president of the Banking Association, and my understanding from the Minister in the Ministry of Finance is that they are keen to participate in such a venture, and it will see women being able to access their maintenance payments as soon as they're made, and we will therefore be able to monitor default much better than we're doing. As it stands now, a default process is only triggered when the mother comes to court and discovers that no maintenance has been paid. So in a situation where perhaps that mother is ill, doesn't get to court for 2 or 3 weeks, then that delinquent father is already several weeks in arrears. So we hope to be using a more technology-driven approach, which will involve people being mothers and fathers, to the extent that that arises, being able to access their payments in real time, and to the extent that it is doable within the given constraints. It might even be possible, I would like to think it's possible, to have a message being sent to a mother's mobile phone saying that the maintenance has been paid. Anybody who travels know that you will get a message telling you that your flight is delayed, or the flight you're waiting on has just landed. A lot of these things are technology driven. But our commitment to the mothers of Barbados is to ensure better follow-up. It is to ensure a system that is more respectful and treats them as the mothers, as you would want any mother to be treated, so that mothers who have engaged this process will not feel as though they're second-class citizens.
My final question is, I don't think that even though there are a number of men who do not pay child maintenance out there, to send a man to jail for that, I think there must be a different system used to make sure the guy pay. But in terms of punishment, I don't think you should send a guy to jail with hardened criminals for this sort of thing. Something has to be done better. I know in North America, wages, as soon as you start work, your ID card kicks in, that you have to pay. And I think if we want to be a first world country, we have to get out of this habit that you wait until the man pays the money in order for the child to get feed. It is really unfair. And I'm not sure if the chamber understands the need, what's happened out there, but it is a big problem, real problem, that a number of mothers can't get support, and to send a man up to jail, I don't think that's the answer really either.
I think, Minister, that it is recognized that sending the individual, the defaulting father, to prison is not a very helpful solution. But let me reiterate that he's not being sent to court for not paying, and I know it may seem like a bit of an artificial distinction, but he is being punished by the court for his contempt of court, for disobeying the order of a court, and that is a fundamental power that all courts have, magistrates and high courts. So he's, by not following the direction of the court and paying $50, $100, $75 per week or whatever it is, you are guilty of contempt of court, and the court is therefore punishing you for that contempt. It is a harsh reality that a person who is sent up may simply not be working, and therefore send them up for contempt of court doesn't deliver the results that you want. There are instances, I know of some, where family will put together and run and pay the money so as to get Tom or Jonathan out of the hands of the magistrate, sorry, out of the hands of the marshal. But there are instances where it is simply not effective.
Honourable Member for St. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. A blessed good morning to all of you, Honourable Minister and colleagues, as well as the distinguished staff from the Attorney General's office. I'm not going to deal with the comments made earlier about the high school dropouts, because there was one. And I feel that Barbados can do better. But we have a lot of challenges, and I agree with the Honourable Minister. Within our schools, within our homes, in the workplaces, we have a lot of problems that we need to work together. So I want to also pledge the support of the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, since we deal with poverty, parenting and families, training, employment, and of course through the welfare department and so on. I want to express my contentment with a lot of what is happening with the Royal Barbados Police Force and what they are doing, particularly now in this current situation. And I am aware that for recruitment, large numbers of females turn up to want to become police officers. And I've heard of the challenges with some of the young men. I want to find out if there is any plan for the police force, if it isn't, because I know the police force had a police sports club and all that, where young men and women would go and be a part of it. I'm not so sure what's happening now in Barbados. But I know that the fire service has got some young people who come in every year, and they do a summer program and so on, so that these young people can get an appreciation of what is being done in the fire service. I would pray that if that is not happening, that the police force will do that, because there are a lot of young boys and girls I know who indicate they want to be a police officer. I don't think it's because they carry a gun. It is because of the kind of upstanding positions policemen have and women have, and of course the kind of duty that they offer service to the country. I would like to know if that is happening, as well as if there's any plan with the Honourable Attorney General's office to look at justices of the peace. There are hundreds, perhaps thousands of them in the country. They live in communities. There are well, I would say people of character, I can't say mostly. People of character, people who want to serve. Is there any plan of incorporating them into the system to help us not only with fighting crime, but helping to shape the character? Barbados has made some tremendous difficulties, created, I should say, as a result of persons going for jobs, and you carry a CV. That thing called a testimonial also made a difference. And we have thrown that aside, and now people are just coming to you, and sometimes they're the largest criminal in your institution that you could ever think about, because you did not have that testimonial from a former teacher, a community person, somebody who could say, yes, that girl Cynthia is a good girl, or she's a little girl on the block playing the fool. Although that should not inhibit, because everybody on the block is not negative. So I want to know if that is the case, if those plans are coming to the fore. And then I have two other questions. They are related, but do you need me, ma'am, to ask all, or do I hold on that one? Yes, ma'am.
In relation to justices of the peace, there's no plan to include JPs in what is considered to be policing. Policing is a highly trained vocation, and I think we know many of the individuals in our neighborhoods who are JPs, and I don't think that it would be a practical thing to try to get them involved in mainstream policing, but I'd like to offer perhaps a different viewpoint. Historically, justices of the peace were community leaders. In fact, I know that the old politicians used to call a JP a poor man knighthood. But the fact is, and I can think of many of them in the districts that I frequent, individuals who are justices of the peace have a strong role to play, not in mainstream policing, but certainly as individuals who will have occasion to relate to police. Issuing search warrants and so on are things that are done by justices of the peace. And perhaps the respect that our communities used to accord to JPs in the past, but which perhaps is now flagging a little bit, ought to be restored, so that those individuals, while not involved in policing, those individuals can serve as a way of influencing the individuals in their communities away from criminal activity. But to answer your question, there is no plan to incorporate JPs into policing. In relation, I believe your first question had to do with the matter of recruitment of young people into the force, and I'll ask the Commissioner to talk about that in greater detail. But let me say this. Right now, the force has historically had a complement of, or had a staffing requirement of 1,520 officers. Right now we are about 270, down from that figure. Now, I think that it is evident that if there are fewer physical bodies available to deploy as police officers, that we're going to have challenges. This is not new. This has been the case when I was last Attorney General over a decade ago, and it was the case a decade before that. The fact is that policing has, in my view, ceased to be the attractive career that it was in the 70s and possibly the 80s. But we have a duty to respond to that. And before I talk about the response, let me further say that the police training school is currently training a cohort of recruits. That cohort of recruits consists of only 18 in number. So the Retail Police Training School is now training an intake of only 18 individuals. And I'm sure that we know that there would have been times in the past when we would have had 40 and 50 and 60 people being trained to become police officers. But we're now down to 18. So what does that tell you about the growth or the decline of the Royal Barbados Police Force? There are two responses that are immediately available to us. Firstly, there are a number of police officers that are not engaged in mainstream policing but are doing work that could be done by civilians. Now, it is therefore one of our responses that we have to put things in place to ensure that those police officers get back as soon as possible to mainstream policing and leave civilian jobs for civilians. I mentioned earlier the situation of the Police Certificate of Character Office. It is staffed by police officers. And while it is possible that a police officer may want to have some oversight, may need to have some oversight, there's no reason why any of that processing has to be done by a police officer. And the more computerized it becomes, the less personal interface you need, and the more likely it is to be carried out effectively by a civilian. So that's one response. Put policemen back to do policing and make provision for civilians to do civilian work. The other response is one that I would like to think is so obvious that it shouldn't require much of an explanation. We have to empower police to carry out their duties in a modern way using available technology. Now, this is an example that it's not original. It doesn't have to be, but it's an example that bears out the case, and many of us may have experienced it if you ever had to give a statement to the police. If you get into an accident on the road, you wait until the police come, and then the police has to take your statement. Now, depending on what happens, you may give it there, or you may have to go back to the station to give it. But if you've ever given a statement to the police officer will give you the option of writing it yourself, or he or she will write it for you. But it is a very painstaking process at the end of which you will sign that statement. Now, is there any logical reason why on the scene that statement, that evidence could not be taken by the use of a smartphone, where the individual just stands in front of the camera and gives the evidence there? It is only if that matter then has to go to trial that it has to be transcribed. Then and only then does it have to be transcribed. But as it is now, it triggers a statement. If we ensure that our police are given the technology to be able to do their job faster, do it more efficiently, and often do it more accurately, we will be using our resources in a more efficacious way. The other matter, which I think is a very important response, and perhaps it follows naturally from the example I just used, is this thing about accidents. And I have indicated to the Commissioner that I want him and his High Command to give me a proposal to eliminate this specter of police having to leave a station or an important scene of a crime to run to every little fender bender that happens in Barbados. There are some countries in the world where police only go to the scene of an accident if there is a significant personal injury or a death. They will also go if there's other criminality associated with it. But in Barbados, I know of an incident where a car accident happened in the car park of a gym. And it could just as easily have been in the supermarket car park or any government building car park. And out comes people, you hit my car, I call in police. So police officers, the whole car park block up. Nobody can come in or out because somebody's bumper or fender got damaged. And a police vehicle has to be mobilized to attend. 2 police officers have to come to deal with something as trifling as that. And if it happens on the road at all, traffic is backed up for 2 miles because you can't leave the scene. Now, is that a rational way of using scarce police resources today? Now, the Commissioner has been asked by me to look to see how we can bring such a system. I understand that it will represent a change for Barbadians of what we normally do, but it is inefficient. There are far more serious things happening in our society than minor traffic accidents which require the attention of the police. But under our current modus operandi, not a man moves. The police got to come and measure up here and measure up there. And then there's this thing about a police report. Because an insurance claim is going to be made, and then they're going to rate the police and ask the police for a police report. So the police officer now has to take his time to reconstruct the evidence, write the report, then it gets typed up, then it has to go to his superior to get approved. All of these things are taking up precious policing time and taking police officers away from what they really need to do today. So recruiting is an issue. I think it is important for us to try to create in the minds of the public that policing is a respectable career path. It is a good job. It is a job that people should want. I heard the leader of the opposition say that he believes that the police force should be able to claim the same amount of resources as the Ministry of Education. I'm not going to get into that debate. I believe, though, that there are many more teachers than police. But I think anybody would like to have a situation where people are paid better for the job that they do. But until such time as our economy allows us to do those things, we have to make sure that the work of the police is facilitated by giving them the tools and the equipment that they need so that they can do it in a more effective and efficient manner.
Thank you.
Commissioner, you wanted to?
Madam Chair, just to add that we do, in fact, engage in career showcases as well, like the BDF and the fire service. And very shortly, we are also rolling out, having a drive for a recruitment drive supported by the Government Information Service. So hopefully, we'll make some impact there.
I'm not going to go into what's happening on the roads and all that now. But my concerns are associated with what I consider to be cultural penetration and Bajans being real good copycats. Because in the 1980s and early 1990s, there was this calypso or this sound, dub sound, what the hell the police can do. And it is from then that I saw an element of high disrespect towards police and their affairs that they have to carry out every day. And it has grown even worse now, where people curse in front of police, they do all kinds of terrible things. I want to find out, I know the Honorable Minister spoke about technology, and yes, I believe that those officers should have the kind of most current equipment to be able to carry out their duties. But the element of disrespect and the obstruction on duty, and when you see it on the videotapes across Barbados, it is very, very disconcerting for me as an older woman, but I know it's for most of Barbadians. And I really want to find out if there are newer programs coming on stream. When I can see a video with a fella, I say a fella because I'm not going to call any ethnic group or anything, people trying to snatch the gun off the hip of the police in an urban community last year. When I hear people in the bus stands and on the roads cursing the police when they're carrying out their duties on scenes of crime, whether it be murder or accidents or whatever, it says that a lot is wrong. I am sure that these young people and their parents never heard about Lund. They never heard about Lyman or Gulston or those police officers who really, really had it on. And yes, I know times are changing. Is it then, sir, that we are, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to have further training for the police, that they know that they're being obstructed when they're on their job? There was one right here by Cave Shepherd today, and the police went to arrest this man, and people upstairs shouting down. That is another threat on their lives, because you don't know what those upstairs have that could impact on the police if they whatever missile it might be. I'm saying, what training is happening to let the police know you carry out your duties, being fair, and I know most of the time they are, and make sure that they are well respected. I know it can't happen overnight, but the public of Barbados, this is their comment from me as I close on this one. They have to show respect for law and order, and it is not when the shoe comes on one's foot that one must say, well, the police didn't do anything, or it is that all of us should be looking out for each other to ensure that we continue to respect the rule of law and do what we have to do to make sure that the respect is flowing from the citizen to the police and vice versa. And I will close on that one. I will speak in another forum on this.
Police officers are trained to manage those situations. We live in a world that is far more aggressive than many years ago. But our officers are trained and can manage those situations. The reality is, though, that for many years, disrespect for law enforcement was never treated. It was taken for granted that it was part of the job to be assaulted, to be resisted, and those things. It was not an offense up and beyond the norm. So I think as a society, we have accepted that over the years. But our officers are trained to manage those situations, and I have no doubt that we can, and even in these difficult times, manage those situations well.
Done? Honor. Go ahead.
Ma'am, is slightly different, and I would wish your guidance on it, because I am one of the most, I was being the strongest person, even stronger than the Commissioner of Police, when I heard that St. Thomas would get a police station, because I knew what those officers at District D were suffering during their many years, and I knew that because of the demographic shifts, where more than 10,000, I think it was almost 11,000 people were eligible to vote, you can tell then that the whole parish is mushrooming when it comes to people. And I wanted to ask a couple questions. I don't know if there is a financial person who will be with the Honorable Minister now to give some answers for me, because pulling is like pulling teeth to find out what's the status of the police station right now in the parish, where residents are all over the place and asking questions. And I don't know if there's a plan now, because I would wish to find out from through the Honorable Minister and through you, ma'am, what is the cost of the facility at District D in King Garden, and did it come under budget? And where are the funds for the library that has not shown its face? That was a part of the specifications, because for me, the library and the community technology aspect of it would have helped to endear the people and the residents of St. Thomas to come in and rub shoulders with the police and help to build confidence and so on. I just want to find out what is happening where that police station is concerned, and how, when it will be completed, if it is fully paid for, if it has been met the cost factor or overruns, and so on and so forth. In a nutshell, I could get the other answers otherwise.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
Jennifer King, Project Manager, Acting Project Office.
Am I here? Jeanette King?
Jennifer King.
Jennifer.
King Garden came in on budget, but there was a change of scope to King Garden due to the facilities, in that there was a basement space during construction, and it was felt that it would be useful if that space was developed. So that space has been developed to a certain degree, and the police, as well as the registration department, have been putting forward briefs as to what will be done in those basements to come. So the question, I guess, in terms of the library being at King Garden, it was felt, based on what was occurring at the time, that the library would not be in its current form, would not be utilized in a manner that would justify the expenditure in the current form of the library, in that based on what was happening with the other libraries around the island in the current form, Whole Town, King Garden, there wasn't enough to justify the expenditure. But it should be noted that the way King Garden was developed, all provisions were made that indeed that particular site could be developed at a later stage if it was deemed necessary. So all infrastructure has been put in place to allow that additional site to be developed in the future as deemed necessary, ma'am.
Thank you. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, ma'am. I think the Honorable Attorney General unintentionally misrepresented something I said earlier, which I'd like to clarify. I did call for increased pay for the police. This is the sixth time, therefore, seventh time, therefore. I'm saying that. In a wider frame, I sought to suggest, I thought fairly clearly, that law and order is so important to us preserving the gains we achieve as a nation, that I think we should be moving in a direction in terms of our budgeting where the provision for law and order expenditure is increased more towards the direction of that which health and education now enjoy. Not suggesting that we necessarily provide more than for health or for education. I'm simply saying we need to up the ante with respect to providing for law and order. Else we may find that all we invest in education and health is wasted or lost because of the threat posed by the erosion of the justice system and law and order in Barbados. I think that for the Attorney General to flippantly say that there are more teachers than police is a little disappointing. And I think it falls a little short of the courage I usually associate with the honorable member when he says that he's not prepared to join a debate on a proposal that we increase the money spent on law and order in Barbados. Having said all of that, let me ask my question before you tell me my time is up. And it is this: are we spending more or less this year on police services? If we are spending more, how so? And if we are spending less, why? And this is on police services.
Let me thank the Leader of the Opposition for his correction. I'd want to suggest to him that when you look at law and order spending, that spending is not necessarily going to be limited to spending under the Office of the Attorney General. We spend on a law enforcement strategy. We spend on the law reform strategy. But then there are other elements of the crime prevention arrangements that we have to spend on. So a crime prevention strategy will include the Ministry of Labor, that is the provision of jobs and so on. The Ministry of Youth and Empowerment, that is changing the mindset of our young people. The Ministry of Education, ensuring that our young people are properly schooled and ready to take on the modern Barbados. The Ministry of Social Care, to try and correct the social ills. The National Housing Corporation, to ensure that there's proper housing opportunities available and that we clean up the inner city slums. So when we talk about spending on law and order, let me just caution the Leader of the Opposition, it is more than spending under the Office of the Attorney General, and it is for that reason, as I've said earlier, that we have tried to get all of the social services heads to weigh in on trying to correct the ills in our society. So it may well be that if the Leader of the Opposition takes all of those areas and the spending that is devoted in those areas and applies them to the law and order strategy, he may well find that the amount of money we spend exceeds the amount of money that is committed for education. In relation to the actual spending on police this year, the figure is down slightly. Not the person among you. Yes. The revised estimates for the year 2018 to 2019 under General Police Services, $88 million. The budgeted estimates for the year 2019 to 2020 is $81 million. And there's a reason for that. We sought to provide the police force, and let me point out to the Leader of the Opposition that the actual expenditure for the year 2017 to 2018 was only 77 million. 2017 to 2018, 77 million. 2018 to 2019, 88 million. So $10 million more were spent in the year that we are now finishing up than in the year that preceded it. And the reason is this, sir. Because of the increase in the instability in some of these areas, it has been necessary for us to provide additional funding for the Royal Barbados Police Force. The Minister of Finance said quite clearly, and it is perhaps that we had a vision when we did our Covenant of Hope, that law and order was to have the first call on our resources. So it became necessary to more than top up the provision available to the Royal Barbados Police Force. We've had to provide them with extraordinary resources in order to be able to deal with the difficulties that we are in at this point in time. And that is why the revised estimates show a figure of $88 million as compared to the previous year. So we have actually included in this current financial year a significant amount of resources that are in the nature of one-off resources as well. So once we make those provisions, we don't have to make those provisions again in the next financial year where we would likely have less fiscal space. So it isn't a case where it is fair to suggest that the estimates provided for 2018-19 is significantly higher than the coming year, and it represents a fall off. It is that the revised estimates for 2018-19 in fact reflects an impetus in terms of the additional provisioning for the Royal Barbados Police Force that we do not think we will need to make in the year 2019-2020.
My honorable friend from St. Joseph is obviously a good lawyer, and he put that argument quite well. And I don't buy it, however. I think everything suggests, all that's happening around us suggests that whatever we provided for police services for 2018-19 should never be less than what we're seeking to ask for 2019-2020. I don't buy that argument. You can reflect on perhaps a poor provision prior to this administration coming to office, and this administration being seized of the urgency of the moment, topping up what was provided for and moving to 88. But I do not know I've heard an argument that justifies a decrease to 81 in the year ahead of us. Now, you know as well as I do, ma'am, I think you do, I was party to discussions around this thing called the Covenant of Hope. And I don't shy away from that fact. I don't shy away from that fact. But all of that notwithstanding, I do not know how you can tell Barbadians that there is some just cause, reason, explanation why you're providing for police services in the year ahead less than you did for last year, simply because in the prior year, the former administration failed adequately to provide.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Assist in this matter. You know, there's a danger in looking at absolute figures without more. And if the leader of the opposition looked at the figures, he would see that fundamentally 6.2 or 6.3 million of the difference between last year, and it will in fact not even be a difference, but between this fiscal year that is closing and the next fiscal year comes purely in emoluments. And he will find that in almost every ministry the same is taking place. And that is largely because the statutory emoluments have taken a position that those posts that could not be filled would be frozen, pending our ability to get out of this crisis. The bottom line is that if you look at all of the other amounts, the operating expenses of the police have gone from 3.145 million to 3.32 million. The maintenance of property remains the same at 3.853 million. The subsidies flat at 160,000. The supplies and materials have gone up, in fact, by more than 15%, from 748,000 to 839,000. What has gone down? In spite of the 5% increase in salaries, other personal emoluments have gone from 12.8 million to 10.6 million, a reduction of 2.2 million. And that would be a combination of acting allowances and also clerical officers who may otherwise have gone home during the layoffs late last year. Similarly, under statutory personal emoluments, your figures have gone from 55.2 million to 51.5 million. And that would be as a result of us taking a decision with the best will in the world. And you just heard the Commissioner of Police say it. You cannot fill posts without a person going to the training school. And the police training school, I believe, is what, 6 months? 6 months. So that at the midterm review, if the numbers are, and the numbers have been trained, then a request can be made to unfreeze the posts. But it makes no sense us carrying and removing the fiscal space that we badly need this year by posts that are empty, not likely to be filled, and therefore preventing us from being able to provide those areas of government with critical monies that are needed when they're needed. If we go similarly to the question of police headquarters and management, OPE drops from 1.549 to 1.33 million, and statutory drops from 9.268 million by a million to 8.261 million. The maintenance of property under police headquarters and management goes from 3.3 to 3.6 million this next year. The supplies and materials goes from 215,000 to 306,000. The professional services goes from 358 to 362. The subscription dropped from 182 to 142. So that in almost every instance. But what I also want to add, members may have forgotten that Parliament finished at 1 o'clock on Friday night. And what we did was to take the deliberate decision a few months ago to upfront in this financial year, as the AG said, capital purchases that are critical to the police. The police have not functioned in this country with any kind of relevant technology and software for years. The last major acquisition, I dare say, came when I was Attorney General, when we went into the Motorola project and bought $26 million of equipment that allowed us to have automated fingerprints and to be able to update a whole raft of systems within the police force. We are now trying to get the cameras going again on the main highways that allow the police, particularly on the main highways and the St. Lawrence Gap and hopefully on the West Coast, to be able to deal with finding people when crimes are committed. We're now trying to get crime mapping software. We're now trying to get the drone technology. All of these things should have been bought by a government of Barbados in the lost decade. But instead, what did we get? People spending money and doing things that would cause the police to have to spend money to pay out in damages or legal costs, because officers who should have been promoted according to a commissioner's directive, 2 commissioners' directives now, were not promoted and instead took their cases to court, such that the government, the Crown, will now have to pay in the event their legal costs and any damages that go as a result, largely because you have taken actions that ought not to have been taken in the first place. So I understand the Leader of the Opposition's angst, and I give him the assurance, as I do the country, that, believe you me, and we've not only put the money under the police force, we've put it under the law courts with the additional three criminal law courts that are going to be started. The only reason those have not started is, once again, an inherited court building that literally, before we came to government, everybody had to move out of. Thirdly, we've put money Friday night in training with respect to the next 12 months, $2.5 million to go for training of young people in cultural activities, and $2.5 million to go to young people in training in sports activities. When we put, and the AG will recall this, as will the Leader of the Opposition, that when we put lights on playing fields many years ago, that made a significant dent into the level of crime taking place across the country, because when people finish playing football at 10, 11, and 12 o'clock at night running about, obviously they found that they were not interested in following the devil and finding work for idle hands. And to that extent, we believe that the absence of structured activity across the country has contributed to the lawlessness and to the waywardness of some of those young people who have found themselves at the center of criminal activity. Similarly, when we come to education this evening, or tomorrow, I want to hear, because the notion of children being put out of school at 15 or as they turn 16 is so repulsive and leads to the kind of activities, and as a result I've asked for a report on all who have been put out of school in the last decade to see how we can work with them to bring them back into mainstream society. And similarly with those who were suspended and sent to Edna Nichols Center, because the policy framework of the government, and we don't have the money to move to it straight away, but the policy framework always knew that Edna Nichols Center would only take suspended persons for 3 weeks. But beyond that, there has to be an institution that allows those children who literally are too difficult to be managed in the secondary school setting to be taken into another setting and to be able to be given the dedicated time and attention and discipline to stop them from literally falling off the edge and entering into a world of crime from which they may never return. So, Madam Chair, I'm grateful to the Leader of the Opposition to allow me to elucidate, and to the Attorney General as Minister of Finance, because what is here is in fact not a reduction in money to be spent whatsoever, but a reality that we were coming to Parliament and voting monies for posts. In fact, these posts have been vacant since, I believe, the former Chief Justice and former member of St. Thomas was Attorney General. They have been vacant for over a decade and a half. And in those circumstances, and not just in this ministry, across a number of ministries. And the law requires that we would normally have to provide for that which is statutory. The only way around it is for us to have frozen the posts for now, which we have done, and then when there is urgent need or people have been trained, which we anticipate will happen as we go forward, then we release the numbers. By that time, the growth that they keep saying is not being pursued by this government will have taken place. But I can assure them that with growth, revenue will increase, and once revenue increases, then there is fiscal space to do what we have to do at that point in time. Thank you.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, ma'am. I thank the Honorable Prime Minister for that response, I guess, for helping the Honorable Attorney General around the bend there. Well, I guess that's why she's Prime Minister. However, I think what she responded to is a reduction in $8 million of thereabouts in police services provision, and she related that to
Order, ma'am. There is no reduction. There has been a freezing of posts. Now, if the honorable member insists on categorizing it, it causes me to wonder how he will speak to our Lord about the things that happen on earth.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you for that clarification. Our Lord is very forgiving and understanding of the frailty of humanity. I take back the word reduction. Change in the provision documented here for police services, and it is related to some adjustments relative to emoluments. It still does not respond to the issue as to what we're doing to increase the provision for actual police services outside of emoluments. But that notwithstanding, my
Elucidation, ma'am, because clearly I spoke too quickly. A government that seeks to purchase technology, in fact, the number on Friday night was $5.8 million. $5.8 million was voted by this chamber when last we met on Friday night after the hour of midnight, so it was Saturday morning. That is for police services. It's not for schools, it's not for anything else, it's for direct police services. We've also agreed that we will work with other agencies and entities, including the Port Authority. The Port Authority is seeking to borrow $41 million to be able to put in place a scanner and other scanners, a major scanner for the containers, because for the last 5 years, one scanner of the two was not working at all at any point in the last 5 years, and the other one was working on and off. And as a result, the ability for Barbadians to be secured by ensuring that those things which come through our ports, it was completely compromised. Now, therefore, all of the money on law enforcement and police services will not be found under police services alone, but without prejudice to that, the amounts that are being spent under police have significantly increased. Okay, and it happens, a capital purchase is not a recurring amount.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm a little slow sometimes, but clearly 5.8 million at midnight on Friday night really puts us back to where we were last year. And some would be asking, should we not be increasing the ante for police services? I go beyond that, however. I go beyond that, however. And ask for an explanation from the Honorable Attorney General. I'm sure he can manage this one. That's sneaky, ma'am. I take that back. That's a little. He's my friend. I take that back.
On a point of order, I also want the honourable member not to take it back, but to apologize, because
I apologize.
That I spoke as Minister of Finance, not as Attorney General.
Ma'am.
And for him, therefore, to cast an aspersion on the Attorney General for me speaking as Minister of Finance is for him to willfully ignore the responsibilities allocated by me and my cabinet.
Ma'am. That was a tongue-in-cheek remark. The Honourable Member of St. Joseph, the parish of my birth, is my friend. And we tend to tease each other from time to time. That was a slight tease, but I realized that it might have been misunderstood. That is why, no.
Let me ask the question,
If I were thus disposed, I would not be taking back anything. I will be coming at you with much greater ferocity. But tongue-in-cheek remark, ma'am, to my honorable friend from St. Joseph, we do that from time to time, and that's why I voluntarily took it back, because I know some people, not knowing me, not knowing us, might misinterpret that, so I take that back. And perhaps I wouldn't even bother to ask the question. I was going to ask you about the monies provided for professional services, about $500,000 in difference. And then if you wouldn't, ma'am, because I suspect I will not get another chance to ask another question in this debate, to tell us about the operations at the Forensic Center, the status thereof.
Which professional service under which head?
That is 0407075, General Management and Coordination Services. Is a $500,000 difference. Yeah.
The response to that question is in the context where it is often necessary, Madam Chair, to seek additional services other than those which the chambers immediately can make available. This therefore reflects an increase in the amount of money that we are making available for various consultants and lawyers so as to support the work of the Office of the Attorney General. The Solicitor General has explained to this chamber some of the challenges that she faces in relation to the staffing. But in addition to that, there are also additional responsibilities that we have to take charge of. The role of consultants to the Office of the Attorney General are varied. One of them we have already indicated to the public is the former Commissioner of Police, who is being brought on to assist in supporting our strategies and so on in relation to law enforcement and related issues. It also covers the cost of appeals to the Caribbean Court of Justice and other international fora. The reality is that even with the best will in the world, in order to be able to deal with these matters effectively and efficiently, the Office of the AG is not quite staffed as it should be, and therefore you will find that across many of the areas, additional provision is made for the engagement of consultants. The other matter raised had to do with the Forensic Sciences Center. The Forensic Sciences Center, when it was established under former Barbados Labour Party administration, was seen as being an important adjunct to not just law enforcement, but also to deal with things like DNA testing and so on in Barbados. The facility has been allowed to fall into a state of disrepair. It is now at a state where it cannot effectively discharge its duty to the public by way of doing examinations for the police force. And therefore the police force annually has to spend vast amounts of resources that it could otherwise use for its ordinary purposes to get samples tested outside of Barbados. When we have constructed in Barbados a laboratory that, when we were last in administration, was seen as being so good that it could be used as an anti-doping laboratory for the upcoming World Cup, Cricket World Cup. As it stands now, we have to devote a lot of resources to getting the laboratory back up to speed. Equipment that they have is now no longer going to be serviced beyond this financial year, so new equipment has to be brought in. You would appreciate this equipment is specialized. There are areas in the laboratory where the scientists cannot function because the air quality is so poor. And of course you would recognize that you're dealing with sensitive samples and so on, and also that the equipment needs to function in very narrow tolerance bands. So the laboratory, in short, has not been serving the public well. It has not been serving the police force in the way in which it should. And I think a matter came before our court recently, the Coroner's Court, where the Director of Forensic Sciences had to concede that certain tests had not been done and had not been done simply because the laboratory was in a poor state. We've put money in the budget so as to be able to begin that remediation work and get the laboratory back up and running.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and request leave to sit again.
Question is that I do now report to the Honourable Speaker progress and ask for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported progress and humbly asks for leave to sit again.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of today's sitting until 2:15 p.m. in the afternoon.
The question is that this honorable chairman be suspended until 2:15 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chairman is so suspended